A few weeks ago, the Queen and I were delighted to make a state visit to the Vatican.
A hidden document just exposed the unthinkable. King Charles opened an envelope that revealed Queen Camilla's shocking secret. She tried to erase Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis from his will behind his back. When he found out, his rage was unstoppable. What he did next left the entire palace in absolute shock. Camilla was forced out. The royal family is crumbling from the inside, and what comes next will stun the world.
Your Royal Highnesses, riflemen, ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful to be surrounded once more by a sea of green.
Charles had always been a man of routine. His mornings followed a predictable pattern, one that brought him comfort in the midst of his many responsibilities. But on this particular morning, as he made his way to the breakfast room, he noticed something unusual. Queen Camilla was not there. The place setting across from him sat empty, the fine china untouched, the silverware gleaming in the morning light. It was unlike her to miss breakfast without sending word, and the absence struck him as odd. He sat down, attempting to push the concern from his mind, but found himself unable to focus on the newspaper before him. The tea tasted bland, and the quiet of the room felt oppressive rather than peaceful. Minutes passed, each one marked by the steady ticking of the ornate clock on the mantelpiece. Charles found his fingers drumming lightly against the table, a rare display of restlessness from a man who had spent decades mastering the art of composure. It was then that one of his most trusted aides entered the room. The man's face was pale, his movements careful and deliberate, as if he carried something fragile. In his hands was a thick envelope, cream-coloured with a wax seal that Charles recognized immediately. The aide approached with a formal bow, his voice steady but quiet as he explained that the envelope had arrived from the legal office and had been marked as private correspondence for the king's eyes only. Charles accepted the envelope, feeling its unexpected weight in his hands. For a moment, he simply held it, his thumb tracing the edge of the royal seal. There was something about the formality of it, the directness of its arrival, that made him hesitate. He looked up at the aide, asking who had sent it, but received only confirmation that it had come directly from the legal office. After dismissing the aide with a nod, Charles sat alone with the envelope, the silence of the breakfast room suddenly feeling far more significant. When he finally broke the seal, the wax cracking sharply in the quiet room, he pulled out several sheets of heavy paper. The type of paper used for important legal documents, the kind that immediately signals matters of great consequence. His eyes moved to the heading at the top of the first page, and what he read made him pause. The document was titled as Amendments to His Last Will and Testament. Charles felt his breath catch slightly. He had not requested any amendments. He had not authorized any changes to his carefully considered plans for the future. As he began to read through the document, his eyes scanning the formal legal language, something caught his attention. Or rather, the absence of something. He read one section, then read it again, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The names of Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, his beloved grandchildren, were nowhere to be found. The provisions he had specifically included for them, the protections and considerations he had thoughtfully put in place, had been completely removed. Charles set the papers down on the table, his hands suddenly feeling unsteady. He picked them up again, reading more carefully this time, hoping he had misunderstood. But the meaning was clear. The draft stated explicitly that Charlotte and Louis would no longer be direct beneficiaries of his will. The children who brought such joy to his life, who represented the future of the family, had been systematically removed from his plans for their inheritance. His eyes moved down the page, searching for an explanation, and found something even more troubling. There, at the bottom of the document, was a handwritten note to the royal lawyers. The note was brief but clear, instructing them to proceed with the adjustment as discussed. Charles recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to Camilla. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was not a clerical error. This was not a misunderstanding that could be easily corrected. This was a deliberate action taken without his knowledge or consent by someone he had trusted implicitly. The woman he had married, who shared his life and his responsibilities, had gone behind his back to alter one of the most personal and important documents he would ever create. As Charles sat with this knowledge, his mind began pulling up memories he had previously dismissed as unimportant. He remembered a conversation from several months earlier, on a rainy afternoon when they had been sitting together in the study. Camilla had mentioned something about simplifying inheritance, matters about focusing resources where they would be most effective for the monarchy. At the time, he had thought she was speaking in general terms, perhaps suggesting they review certain ceremonial expenses or administrative costs. He had not given it much thought, simply agreeing to discuss it later and then moving on to other matters. There had been another conversation, this one over dinner. Camilla had remarked that William's children would always be well provided for, that they would inherit titles and positions regardless. She had suggested, almost casually, that perhaps not all of them needed equal shares of everything. Charles had frowned slightly at the comment, but had been tired after a long day and had not pursued the topic. He had assumed she was thinking out loud, exploring ideas that they would eventually discuss properly. Now, sitting alone with the legal documents spread before him, those casual remarks took on an entirely different meaning. They had not been idle musings or theoretical discussions. They had been groundwork, careful preparation for actions she had already decided to take. The conversations had not been seeking his input, but rather testing the waters, seeing how he might react. Charles thought about Charlotte with her quick mind and natural grace, always curious about the history behind the crown jewels and the stories of the family. He thought about Louis, full of energy and laughter, running through the palace corridors with the kind of joy that reminded everyone around him why family mattered more than formality. These were children who deserved to know they were valued, who deserved to understand their place in the family was secure. The anger that began to build in Charles was not the hot, explosive kind. It was colder, steadier, the kind that comes from a deep sense of betrayal. He read through the document once more, examining every detail, looking for any possible explanation that might make this less damaging than it appeared. But there was none. The changes were deliberate, the instructions clear, and the signature unmistakable. As he sat there, the morning sun now fully illuminating the breakfast room, Charles made a decision. This was his will, his family, his responsibility. No one, regardless of their position or their relationship to him, had the right to make these decisions without his knowledge and approval. The document before him represented not just a legal change, but a fundamental breach of trust. And that, he knew, was something that could not be ignored or easily forgiven. The hours that followed the discovery felt endless. Charles remained in his study, the amended will documents still resting on his desk like evidence of a crime. He knew he needed to speak with Camilla, to hear directly from her why she had done this. But he also needed time to master the anger that threatened to overwhelm his usual composure. A confrontation driven by raw emotion would serve no one, least of all, the resolution he sought. By early afternoon, he had made arrangements for a private meeting. The staff were instructed to ensure complete privacy, and word was sent to Camilla that the king required her presence immediately. Charles positioned himself in the grand sitting room, a space that had witnessed countless important conversations throughout his life. The formal setting was deliberate. This was not a casual discussion between husband and wife. This was a matter that struck at the very heart of his role as both king and grandfather. When Camilla finally entered the room, she appeared relaxed, almost cheerful. She was dressed elegantly, her appearance suggesting she had been occupied with routine matters and had no expectation of what awaited her. Her smile was warm as she greeted him, asking if something was wrong. The normalcy of her demeanor only heightened the tension Charles felt. How could she act as if nothing had happened? He did not return her greeting with the usual warmth. Instead, his response was direct and cutting. He asked her a single question, his voice low and controlled. Why? The word hung in the air between them, simple yet loaded with meaning. Camilla's expression shifted slightly, confusion crossing her features as she asked what he meant. But Charles was in no mood for games or pretense. He clarified immediately, asking why she had removed Charlotte and Louis from his will without his knowledge or permission. For just a moment, something flickered in Camilla's eyes. It might have been a surprise or perhaps a realization that her actions had been discovered, but she recovered quickly, her response measured and calm. She explained that she had believed it was for the best, that she was thinking about the long-term strength of the monarchy. In her view, dividing resources among too many beneficiaries would weaken the institution. Difficult decisions, she suggested, were sometimes necessary for the greater good. Charles listened to her. Explanation. But with each word, his anger grew colder and more resolute. When she finished speaking, he stood slowly from his chair, His voice, though still controlled, carried an edge that made clear how seriously he viewed this breach. He pointed out that Charlotte and Louis were not abstract concepts or line items in a budget. They were his grandchildren, living children with futures that deserved to be protected and honored. They were not pieces on a board for anyone to move according to strategic calculations. Camilla held her ground, arguing that the children would be well cared for regardless. William would provide for them, she insisted. They already had titles, influence, and opportunities that most children could never dream of. The changes she had proposed were simply about focusing resources where they would do the most good for the monarchy as an institution. She presented her actions as pragmatic, even noble, as if she had been shouldering a burden that Charles himself had been too emotionally attached to handle properly. But Charles rejected this framing entirely. The monarchy, he told her, was not built by cutting away the people who belonged to it. It was built on loyalty, on genuine bonds between family members, on the understanding that each person had inherent worth beyond their strategic value. What she called strength, he called coldness. What she called pragmatism, he saw as a fundamental misunderstanding of what held the royal family together. The room felt smaller as the conversation intensified. Camilla crossed her arms, her voice taking on a defensive tone. She insisted she had been acting in the institution's best interests, that someone needed to think clearly about what would keep the crown secure for decades to come. Sentiment, she argued, could not be allowed to cloud judgment. But when Charles heard her use that word, sentiment, something inside him snapped. His voice rose for the first time, not to a shout, but to a level that made the servants stationed nearby exchange worried glances. He asked if she truly believed that ensuring his grandchildren's place in the family legacy was mere sentiment. Was a grandfather's love for his grandchildren nothing more than emotional weakness in her eyes? The servants, sensing the gravity of the situation, quietly excused themselves from the room, closing the doors behind them and leaving the king and queen entirely alone. Without the presence of staff, the conversation became even more direct. Charles pointed out that she could have come to him at any time with her concerns. She could have raised her suggestions, presented her arguments, and allowed him to make the final decision. That was how their partnership was supposed to work. Instead, she had gone behind his back, given instructions in his name, and acted as though she held final authority over his personal will. The secrecy of her actions, more than anything else, revealed her true intentions. Camilla defended herself, arguing that she had acted precisely because she knew Charles would not make these changes himself. She suggested he was too emotionally attached to the children to see what was necessary. It was clear she believed she had been doing him a favor, protecting him from his own inability to make hard choices. But this explanation only deepened Charles's sense of betrayal. She was essentially admitting that she had overruled him because she thought she knew better, because she believed his judgment was compromised by love. Charles stepped closer to her, his voice dropping to a deliberate, measured tone that somehow carried more weight than any raised voice could. He told her clearly not to mistake his kindness for weakness, not to confuse his love for his family with blindness to reality. And most importantly, he told her never to assume she could decide for him what his family meant to him. The boundaries she had crossed, he made clear, were not ones that could be easily repaired. For the first time in the conversation, uncertainty appeared in Camilla's expression. She seemed to realize that this was not a disagreement that would blow over with time. She suggested he was treating this as though she had done something unforgivable, her tone carrying a hint of disbelief that he was reacting so strongly. But Charles did not hesitate in his response. He told her simply and directly that she had indeed done something unforgivable. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Neither of them moved. The afternoon light had shifted, casting long shadows across the ornate furnishings. The room that had seemed grand and stately now felt oppressive, as if the walls themselves were bearing witness to the fracturing of a relationship. Charles turned away from her slightly, as if looking at her had become too difficult. When he spoke again, his words were final and absolute. This decision would not stand. The changes to his will would be reversed immediately, and there would be no further discussion on the matter. Camilla stood frozen, her usual confidence shaken. She adjusted the sleeve of her jacket, a small gesture that betrayed her discomfort. Charles looked at her one final time, his expression a mixture of disappointment and resolve. He told her they would speak again, but that she needed to understand something fundamental. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The trust between them had been damaged in a way that simple apologies or explanations could not repair. The conversation was over, but both of them knew that the consequences were only beginning to unfold. The decision came swiftly, though not impulsively. Charles spent the remainder of that day in contemplation, weighing his options and considering the path forward. By evening, his mind was made up. The breach of trust was too significant to overlook, and the message needed to be clear, not just to Camilla, but to anyone who might question where his loyalties lay. The following morning, he summoned her once more, this time with a resolution that allowed no room for negotiation. When Camilla entered his private study, the atmosphere was markedly different from their previous encounter. There was no anger in Charles's demeanor now, only a cold, settled determination. He informed her directly that she would need to leave the palace, at least for the foreseeable future. The words were delivered calmly, but their impact was immediate and devastating. Camilla's face paled as she processed what he was saying. She asked if he was serious, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might make the situation more real. Charles confirmed that he had never been more serious about anything. This was not a punishment delivered in the heat of anger, he explained, but a necessary step to protect what mattered most to him. The decision had been made with full consideration of its implications, and it was final. Camilla struggled to comprehend how their relationship had reached this point. She asked if he would truly cast her out over this matter, the disbelief evident in her tone. But Charles corrected her understanding. He was not casting her out. He was establishing boundaries that she had proven unable or unwilling to respect on her own. He reminded her that at the center of this entire situation were his grandchildren, two innocent children who deserved a secure future within the family. Their well-being and their rightful place in the royal legacy were not negotiable points. Camilla had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, that some things could not be measured by strategic advantage or institutional benefit. Love and family loyalty operated according to different principles, ones that superseded political calculations. The arrangements for her departure were handled with discretion. Charles gave instructions to his most trusted staff to prepare her belongings and to ensure the process was conducted quietly, without unnecessary attention. The last thing anyone needed was for this private matter to become an immediate public spectacle. Camilla stood silent as these arrangements were discussed, the reality of the situation settling over her like a heavy cloak. When Charles asked if she had anything further to say, she could only shake her head. There seemed to be no words adequate to bridge the gap that had opened between them. As she reached the threshold of the royal wing, preparing to leave the life she had fought so hard to establish, Camilla paused. She looked back at Charles, her expression unreadable. It was not a look of anger or pleading, but something more complex, a mixture of emotions too tangled to separate. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into silence. Charles remained where he was, standing alone in the study that suddenly felt vast and empty. Rather than returning to his usual duties, Charles found himself drawn to the palace. Gardens. The fresh air and open space offered a different kind of clarity than the gilded rooms inside. He walked the gravel path slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind occupied with memories and concerns about the future. The garden had always been a place where he could think clearly, away from the formality and pressure of his official role. Here, surrounded by roses and carefully tended hedges, he could simply be a man grappling with a difficult decision. His thoughts turned repeatedly to Charlotte and Louis. He remembered afternoons spent with them in these very gardens, Charlotte asking endless questions about the flowers and the history of the palace grounds, Louis chasing butterflies with the determined enthusiasm only a young child could muster. These were the moments that defined family for him, the simple joys that made all the responsibilities and pressures worthwhile. The idea that anyone would seek to diminish these children's place in the family, to reduce their worth to a matter of financial strategy, was deeply troubling to him. Sitting on a marble bench near the fountain, Charles allowed himself to fully consider the implications of what he had done. Sending Camilla away would not go unnoticed. Eventually, people would ask questions. The press would speculate, the public who had watched their relationship evolve over decades would form opinions. Some would support his decision, viewing it as a necessary stand for family values. Others might see it as an overreaction, a private dispute that should have been resolved differently. The monarchy itself might face scrutiny, with critics questioning whether personal conflicts were affecting the institution's stability. But even with all these potential consequences weighing on him, Charles felt certain he had made the right choice. Wealth and titles could be passed down through generations easily enough. They were tangible things, governed by clear rules and established precedents. But ensuring that each member of the family understood their inherent worth, that they knew they were valued beyond their strategic utility, required something more. It required vigilance, protection, and the willingness to make difficult stands when necessary. After considerable time in the garden, Charles returned to his study with renewed purpose. He sat at his desk and pulled out fresh writing paper. What he needed to compose was not a formal decree or an official statement, but something more personal. He began writing a letter to William, his eldest son and the father of the children at the center of this dispute. William deserved to hear the full truth directly from him, explained in his own words rather than filtered through intermediaries, or worse, learned from press speculation. The letter was difficult to write. Charles found himself starting and stopping, searching for the right words to convey both the facts of what had happened and the reasoning behind his response. Explained how he had discovered the amendments to his will, Camilla's role in those changes, and the conversation that had followed. He detailed his reasoning for sending her away, emphasizing that this was about protecting Charlotte and Louis, about ensuring they understood their place in the family was secure and valued. As he wrote, Charles was careful to avoid language that might sound like he was asking for validation or support. This was not about rallying allies or creating divisions within the family. It was simply about being honest with his son about a decision that would inevitably affect all of them. He wanted William to understand that this had not been done lightly or impulsively, but after careful consideration of what was best for the children and for the integrity of the family's values. Meanwhile, far from the palace, Camilla sat in the secluded residence that had been arranged for her. The rooms were comfortable, even elegant, but they were not hers in any meaningful sense. She stared out of the window at gardens that belonged to someone else's life, feeling the weight of displacement settle over her. The years she had spent establishing her position, the criticism she had endured, the gradual acceptance she had earned, all of it seemed suddenly fragile, as if it could be swept away by a single disagreement. In her mind, a different narrative was forming. She had not acted out of malice or self-interest. She had genuinely believed she was helping, making difficult decisions that Charles was too emotionally close to make himself. The fact that he could not see this, that he had responded with such severity, felt like a betrayal of its own. She had stood by him through countless challenges, and now, when she had tried to contribute meaningfully to the monarchy's future, she found herself cast aside. As the afternoon wore on, Camilla made her own decision. If this situation became public, if the press began asking questions and forming narratives, she would not remain silent. She would not allow herself to be painted as the villain in a story where she had been trying to act responsibly. Her reputation, carefully built over years of public service, was too important to surrender without a fight. Whatever came next, she would be ready to defend herself and her actions. The letter reached William and Catherine on a quiet morning at their country residence. The envelope bearing the royal seal arrived with the usual formality, but something about its timing and the way it had been marked for immediate attention suggested this was no routine correspondence. Catherine was the first to notice it on the breakfast table, her fingers pausing over the wax seal as if she could sense the weight of what lay inside. William was standing by the window when she called to him, her voice carrying an unusual note of concern. He turned and saw the envelope in her hands, recognized his father's seal immediately, and felt an instinctive tightening in his chest. Catherine broke the seal carefully and began to read, her eyes moving across the lines with increasing speed. Within moments, her face had gone pale, and William crossed the room quickly to stand beside her. She looked up at him, struggling to find the words. Camilla had been sent away from the palace. The Queen was no longer residing in the royal household. Catherine handed him the letter, and William took it with steady hands, though his expression had already darkened. As he read his father's careful explanation of what had transpired, of the discovery regarding the will and the confrontation that followed, his jaw tightened visibly. The details were laid out clearly, without embellishment or emotional language, but the underlying pain was evident in every sentence. When William finished reading, he folded the letter deliberately and set it on the table. Catherine watched him closely, waiting to see how he would respond. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low but carried absolute conviction. He stated simply that his father had been right to do what he did. There was no hesitation in his tone, no doubt about where his loyalty lay. Catherine asked if he truly agreed with sending Camilla away, seeking confirmation that she had understood his position correctly. William met her eyes and confirmed without reservation that he supported his father's decision completely. They sat together near the fireplace, the letter resting between them like a physical presence. Catherine's mind began to wander through memories she had stored away, moments that had seemed insignificant at the time but now took on new meaning. She remembered a garden party from a previous summer where Charlotte had picked wildflowers and brought them to Camilla with the proud excitement only a young child could muster. Instead of the warm response such a gesture deserved, Camilla had accepted the flowers with a polite but distant smile before quickly turning her attention elsewhere. Catherine had noticed Charlotte's small shoulders slump, the disappointment evident even as the child tried to hide it. There had been other moments too. A Christmas luncheon where Louis had been telling one of his enthusiastic, rambling stories, the kind that adults usually indulge with patient smiles. But Camilla had turned away mid-story, engaging someone else in conversation as if the child's words were simply background noise. Catherine had caught William's subtle frown at the time, though neither of them had discussed it afterward. Now these memories formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Catherine voiced her thoughts quietly, suggesting that perhaps they should have seen this coming. The signs had been there, small indicators that Camilla's relationship with the children was not what it should have been. William sat in silence for a moment, staring into the fire as he processed not just the current situation, but the accumulation of past events that had led to this point. When he finally spoke, his words were measured but firm. He stated that he did not care how this might look in the newspapers or what speculation might arise. If his father believed this action was necessary, then it was necessary, and William would not question that judgment. Catherine gently reminded him of the potential implications. The family would face questions. The public would form opinions. The press, always eager for palace intrigue, would seize upon any hint of conflict. But William's resolve did not waver. He turned to her with an expression that carried both strength and conviction. His loyalty, he explained, was to his father and to his children. Maintaining appearances or keeping a false peace was not worth sacrificing what was fundamentally right. If people had questions, they could ask them. His position would remain unchanged. There was something in William's tone that Catherine recognized well. Throughout their years together, she had seen him carry the weight of his position with grace and responsibility. But there were certain lines that, once crossed, brought out a different aspect of his character. This was one of those moments. His voice carried not anger but an unshakable determination. When it came to protecting his family and supporting his father's decisions, no amount of public pressure or criticism would move him. Catherine reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. She told him quietly that they would stand together, as they always had. William's expression softened slightly as he nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. They both understood that the days ahead would be challenging. Once news of Camilla's departure became known, whether through official channels or leaked information, the speculation would be intense. Every aspect of the royal family's relationships would be scrutinized, analyzed, and debated by people who had no real understanding of what had transpired. But in that moment, sitting together, in their country home with the fire crackling softly and their children presumably playing somewhere in the house, a decision had been solidified. William stood and walked back to the window, looking out over the fields that stretched into the distance. His posture was straight, his gaze focused on something beyond the immediate landscape. He spoke without turning, his voice carrying a quiet intensity. When the time came, he would speak publicly in support of his father, and he would not hold back or soften his words for the sake of diplomacy. Catherine watched him, feeling a mixture of pride and concern. She knew that William's public support would carry significant weight, but it would also likely intensify the controversy. The press would dissect every word, searching for deeper meanings and hidden tensions. Other members of the royal family might have different perspectives, leading to questions about unity within the monarchy. Yet she also understood that silence or ambiguity would be worse. A clear, principled stand was what the situation demanded. Back at the palace, the atmosphere had begun to shift in subtle but noticeable ways. The staff moved through their duties with heightened awareness, careful not to speak openly about what they might have noticed or overheard. Camilla's absence was a presence of its own, an empty space that everyone was aware of, but no one dared to mention directly. The official explanation, when it was finally provided to those who needed to know, was simply that the Queen was attending to private matters at another residence. The language was deliberately vague, designed to satisfy immediate curiosity without providing any real information. But within the palace walls, those who had been there long enough understood that something significant had occurred. Conversations in hallways became more guarded. Glances between staff members carried unspoken questions. The tension was not dramatic or obvious, but it permeated the atmosphere like a subtle change in air pressure before a storm. Everyone could feel it, even if they could not name it or discuss it openly. For Charles, the days following his decision were marked by a strange mixture of resolve and melancholy. He knew he had done what was necessary, what his conscience and his role as both king and grandfather demanded. Yet there was no satisfaction in having reached this point, no sense of victory. The situation represented a fracture in relationships he had hoped would remain intact, a rupture that would have consequences extending far beyond the immediate circumstances. In the gardens, where Charlotte and Louis continued to play with the innocent joy of children who knew nothing of adult conflicts, Charles found moments of peace. He watched Charlotte chase butterflies with focused determination, heard Louis's laughter ring out across the manicured lawns, and reminded himself why all of this mattered. These children, with their unguarded smiles and boundless curiosity, represented everything he was trying to protect. Their futures, their sense of belonging within the family, their understanding that they were valued and loved, these things were worth fighting for, even when the fight came at a personal cost. Yet even as Charles maintained his resolve, he was aware that the situation remained unresolved in a broader sense. Camilla's departure had addressed the immediate problem, but it had not eliminated the underlying tensions or answered all the questions about what would come next. And somewhere beyond the palace gates, forces were already in motion that would soon bring this private matter into the harsh light of public scrutiny.